Greetings, everybody, and welcome. Hello. How is everybody today? I hope you're having a great day. I hope it's a great Thursday. Hey, it's me, Tantasnar van Dracovin, your Lord and Emperor here at the Dracovin Empire, and your purveyor in this case of everything tabletop, where I am going to just talk to you about some interesting and cool tabletop stuff. I've had a couple of days of doing this where we've gone over some cool topics. Guess what today we got? We got a good one. So, if you've ever seen any of my stuff, you will know that I am a huge fan of Shadowrun. But, and here's the large but, I'm a huge fan of Shadowrun's world. Shadowrun's systems have always been a problem. They still are to this day. Just as a disclaimer, there have been 6 editions of Shadowrun. The easiest to run is also one of the most problematic, and that is 6th edition. I talked about this previously, that when they went to 6th edition, they're like, we want to make it an easier game system. And they've always been making improvements, streamlining things throughout the first 5 editions. 6th editions just took things too far and created too many problems and simplified things too much. They tried to 5th edition, a system that is much more complex than 3rd 3.5 ever was, which 5th edition is really a simplification of the 3rd 3.5 system with influence from both Pathfinder and the 1st edition Pathfinder and 4th edition D&D. But what I love about it is the world of Shadowrun is a really interesting world. It is an alternate history world. That's an important thing to say, because the history of Shadowrun originally starts in the 80s and the 90s. Back when the 1st edition came out, they imagined a world that was approximately 60-ish years in the future. That's when the original edition of Shadowrun took place, 1st edition. And traditionally, if you're looking to when new stuff is published, it's always aiming for that 60 years in the future, 61, 62. So currently, if you're looking for the current year in a Shadowrun setting that you could use, it'd be about 2085. That's the date that would be appropriate to anything being published now. And as much as I'm not a fan of the 6th edition as a mechanical set and would say go for 5th edition or 4th edition, they're basically interchangeable. 5th editions, though, a little bit more streamlined, but very close there. Whichever one you do, the world setting and the stuff that's introduced and the time changes, they're usually pretty good, and they have some really good storylines, and some very interesting storylines. They build on the storylines they already have established, which is great. They don't take any major liberties and directions that don't feel organic to what happens. But to understand the world of Shadowrun, we do have to talk about what happened all those years. Let's talk about some basics of the world that I would go over no matter what for you to understand. I think the first thing to mention is Shadowrun, as it is a science fantasy world. Well, you may ask yourself, what the heck does that mean? Well, what I mean is, it is a science fiction world. We have cyber technology, biotechnology, genetics, super technology, all this kind of stuff that's in there. We also have magic, monsters, dragons, elves, dwarves, trolls, orcs. A lot of other groups are out there. Magic is a thing, and it is a major part of the entire world. So that's where the fantasy comes in. It is also a dystopian world. They did not have a direct apocalypse, but a lot of dystopian things occurred because of the reemergence of magic. This is a world where, in the early 2000s, magic came back. We're going to talk about that as we kind of go over the history. But this is the major turning point, and there's a few things that are in the history early on which are different than how global history goes. And these are things that they may sound mild, but I will point out a couple of these things where there's turning points in history early on to have you an idea of how things changed. Now, I have will try to do my best for this. I have a combination of the PDFs of 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th. Well, 4th, I'm using the core rulebook 20th anniversary, just because it's a little better formatted, and 5th books. I can't find my copy of the 6th edition book. I was looking for it this morning. I'm pretty sure I have one. I don't know where I stored it on my computer. You know, but I have the 5 books, and I have a Wikipedia website which references a bunch, all the stuff from these books and some of the expanded books, which I don't necessarily have all those expanded books, so I feel like using the Wikipedia reference as a website as a reference point for a couple of the minor things that happen are pretty good, because there are some minor things we'll want to talk about today as we review the history. Alright, I was going to throw out a book image of Shadowrun and put it up on here on the page, so let's quickly do that. So yeah, that's kind of our basics for understanding Shadowrun as a whole. That it's this world, I can spell first. First edition. Let's see here. Let's get a picture of the 1st edition core rulebook. Open image, new tab. Because we're going to kind of start with that. And we'll use this one here. Oh, it's going to be gigantic when I put it on. Haha! Don't worry, I can adjust. So, back in the 80s, this is our first book and our first look into the Shadowrun world. I'm just going to put this here. Whee! We'll put it next to me. Hi. And I'll change these out for the other books as we go and we talk in time and stuff like that, and we get to new dates. So I'll have this one here for probably the first, like, up until the 2010s. Then we'll switch to 2nd edition, and we'll do the 2010s, and then half of the 2020s, 2nd edition, 3rd edition, rest of the 2020s, 2030s, 2040s, 2050s, 4th edition, 5th edition, 2060s, 2070s, and when we get to the 2080s, which is the modern time, I'll throw up the 6th edition book, so you can see these. And I'll probably use the 4th edition version of stuff. But as I say, so, I got here my Wikipedia thing and my sites for all this information. The thing we start with out of all these things is the beginning of everything, the 1980s, where there are there are 3 things that technically happened in the 1980s that should be noted. And these are things that are different from our world. These are the first breaking points from our world that's beyond just the world as a whole and stuff directly related to the Shadowrun universe. First off, in 1986, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court at the time stepped down to join the campaign for the bicentennial of the U.S. Constitution. That's in history. In the Shadowrun world, Chief Justice Warren E. Burger did not step down. Now, this is an important thing because Warren E. Burger, the person he was, makes a point as to decisions he will make in the future, which are going to be integral to the changes in the Shadowrun timeline. Effectively, his replacement was a different person, and we know the kind of decisions his replacement were. But because of his decisions of being a much older gentleman, much older time frame, made decisions that are going to affect things heavily. The second thing that is noted is, in this timeline, George H.W. Bush did not get elected after Reagan. Michael Dukakis won. So there's a difference there. So that means it's a difference in the makeup of the political sphere already leading into the 90s. This is an important thing to think about, is we have a much more different juxtaposition, and already time is changing. The last thing I will mention from the 80s, and the last thing that you really should know about, is we have the birth of a Spike baby. Someone that we have the actual birth date of, and is an elf outside of magic's return. This is the first time that tells us Shadowrun is a magical world where magic has been gone. but is beginning to return, is there are these children who are occasionally born, and most of the time they are elves, because elves are probably the least requirements for magic in comparison to a lot of the other metatypes. Everyone is human. We're just divided now by... think of it like... I would almost call it like dog breeds. How the animal dog expresses itself very differently. That two breeds of dogs can look very different, but be very vastly different. I would compare it closer to that. There are subspecies of humans. They can still get together with each other, you know, but there's also a magical nature to this that expresses these genes differently. So yeah, it's very weird, and it's a crazy thing, and it's kind of hard to explain, and that's getting into the genetics and magic genetics of the goddamn human species, which is a problem talking about Shadowrun. But we will talk a little bit about that here. That might be a conversation for another day. But Liam O'Connor, who's a major figure in Shadowrun history, not the most major, but effectively one of the major nations, Tirnanog, he is the first president of it. And he was born in 1987. He is an elf, born before magic returns. This is the thing that, like, because elves are very, very rarely distinguishable from humans, it might just be genetic disorders before then that are blamed on. Why does someone have pointed ears, a little bit taller, maybe live longer? Hard to say. But the 1990s is when things really begin to change. We do see different presidents and different people, and you know, this is a time period where, like, Warren E. Burger then finally retires. If we retired in the 1980s, a more conservative judge would have been put in. This is a retirement here. We have someone who is very, I would say, anti-government being elected after Dukakis. So it's a much more extreme person who gets into office after Dukakis. So instead of having George Bush and then moving into Bill Clinton, we have a Democrat leading into a more conservative Republican person. So putting in, you know, after Berger, rather than the replacement there, someone that is much more extreme in charge of the Supreme Court in 94. This is very important. We have someone that's very anti-government, probably is looking to, like, you know, minimize the government very powerfully and set up things differently. Getting 2 terms in the 90s. This person was known for cutting the military budget in half, sold off Amtrak and the U.S. Postal Service. So these are huge changes in the way the U.S. worked. Now, we hit the first major moment in time. The Sierra Tech decision. All the books, every last one of them, calls this the rise of the megacorp. Sierra Tech is the point in time where history not only changes, but changes in a major way, because corporations, as powerful as they are now, were granted massive amount of power with this decision. It's 99, and the thing that sets this off is there are food riots in New York City. Basically, there's some problems, food riots, there's been some issues going on, and this is kind of the culmination of a 3-year strike by the, a 3-month strike by the Teamsters. So the Teamsters go on strike. That's the first thing. New York City ends up getting food riots because of issues with delivery and things going on there. And so you see we've got this problem that we're sort of like rising into. This was the beginning of everything. And, yeah. The world would change with this decision because mega corporations would become a thing. So, at the culmination of this food riots, basically, that began to occur, people took to the streets. They were starving. They were desperate. There were thousands injured. Hundreds were actually killed as this violent mob kind of spread throughout New York City. And it culminated in a major disaster of a level that's really hard to describe, because it was a biological disaster that happened. The rioters. So the Teamsters have rioted. The Teamsters went on strike. It's April. The rioters, the mob attack a Sierra Tech medical truck. They end up killing 20 employees, 200 civilians as part of attacking a medical truck. And it's not just any medical truck. It's a medical waste truck. That's the important thing about this, is these people have now tried a truck hauling medical waste, thinking that it is food delivery. There was a gunfight. So Sierra Tech security came to the aid of these corporate truckers, trying to get to the medical facility, and so it was a war between the security, armed, being drawn in, and the people here. Because this was as it was going and entering a facility. So this is like at a research facility, these truckers have basically, they were forced to basically, they were trying to leave, they were forced to go back to the research facility. There was an attack by the mob, forcing them back to this. The security basically opens fire. There's a war between the security and the rioters, and a lot of people die. Think about that. Over 200 rioters died. So, the state and federal government basically charged Sierra Tech with criminal negligence, because they could see that corporate facilities in the city especially kind of had a growing bit of power and army. And, it was, they had their own private security services that were well-trained and well-armed, much more so than the police, that they were protecting their facilities with this. The police were, with everything going on, were taxed. So they were hiring on, people that could defend their places and were probably a lot more militaristic. The, state and city government wanted to crack down on this, and they started a federal case. The Sierra Tech decision. It was the Sierra Tech Corporation v. United States. So, yeah, the employees used deadly force to keep people away from a large amount of, not food, but medical waste. It's kind of an interesting thing that it went up to the Supreme Court. The Lynch administration, the person who is in charge now. So we have, of course, Jeffrey Lynch, who's been the president now since 92. He's a second term. This is the end of his second term. He saw the growth of private security forces because of the nature of what was going on in the country and stuff like that, and things like that. The private security was becoming a thing. Remember, we have private security and stuff. They're like, this is a thing that exists in the world. But the growth of this thing. So they wanted to use this as, a way to kind of cut down on that. While Sierra Tech was like, hey, we didn't want this vehicle to be looted, and then the building being looted, because we have a building that's a medical facility with a lot of dangerous things, and we have a truck filled with medical waste. So the thing is, it came down to the U.S. tried to fight this by saying, like, oh, hey, don't travel, take medical waste through a very dangerous area. And, of course, the entire thing went to trial. It was a big case, and to not get into most of the way that things went, there was a 193-page decision exploring the legal nature of corporations, that the longest one since a decision back in 1819. Sierra Tech, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court at that time, ruled in favor of them. The responsibility arising from commercial activities. There was further appears. So, this is the constitutional rights of corporations as moral persons has been recognized since Santa Clara versus County in the Southern Pacific Railroad in 1889. This basically ruled that corporate security forces could be considered a well-regulated militia as stated by the Second Amendment. Here we go. Here's the beginning of it all. A well-regulated militia for a corporate security force. So now they have the right to maintain an armed security force to protect its personnel and property. The Supreme Court also was like, hey, they were also protecting the public, you know. Innocent civilians would have been hurt by this waste. They were trying to safely dispose of waste. So, yeah. Now, this first one here has made private military forces in a corporation a thing. It's not the only thing that's lead us to the birth of mega corporations and a downward track, but think about this. Now, Disney, in this world, having an armed security force with guns and weapons and well-trained, is considered a militia. A well-regulated militia. Google would be the same. Any corporation would be the same. Anyway. There were some other things going on in 1999. There were already some tensions that would lead to what would come in the future. Because, as we know, we here in the North American continent have always been bad to the Native American people. And unfortunately, this is the beginning of more bad stuff to the Native American people. I will tell you, the things that happened to the Native Americans have been terrible. In this world, they're just as terrible. And more bad things were happening in this time period. That, you know, we didn't do any new terrible things. Great for us. But unfortunately, a lot of this stuff, especially up in Canada and stuff, and in the US, would lead to very dark directions. So, now we have to talk about the next big thing that happened now that leads us to the apocalypse. The second, and it's two sets of decisions. These are, again, major decisions. Is the Shiwase decision. So, we've already got the one big political decision, the Sierra Tech decision, which has created something different. It's created a direction that is probably, it's not good, but now we want to talk about what this means next. Shiwase decision. Because the resource rush was caused because of this. Anyway, so the case of this came to be in 2000 and 2001. There was two technical different decisions. And these decisions made Shiwase into the first megacorporation. That's what I'm going to tell you now. The way that megacorporations are defined in Shadowrun were created by these two sets of decisions together. So, Shiwase Corporation. It's doing stuff in California. In 1998, it filed a request with the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commissions to build a nuclear power plant. It planned to install a small reactor, similar to a research reactor. It would have limited power output and only power its factory. So it had this factory, but it was having problems with the power grid. So they're like, hey, there are research nuclear reactors. We want to build one of that level, so a very small nuclear reactor, put it in here. So it was turned down by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. The commission argued that, it's hazardous and kind of stuff like this. So it would have to have commercial or research purposes. It came to the Supreme Court. So, Shiwase claimed it fulfilled all requirements for such a plant, and its output would answer to the existing needs. This is the first of the major decisions. Because, why is this decision important? Well, it was sided with Sierra Tech. Basically, the judges validated the lawyer's line of reasoning that TREG regulations authorizing the building of a nuclear power plant. So, the Supreme Court reviewed all of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's requirements. So, the local police force was forced to be permanently involved in the plant security. Basically, this entire thing allowed Sierra Tech to build a nuclear reactor. Okay. That's the first decision. That's not a big decision here. It's a weird decision. It's not great, but we can see how the Supreme Court is very different now than, well, who knows if ours would have made any kind of crazy things like this. But, this comes to the technical second decision, which was the next year later. Also, we have a new election, new president, all those kind of things. So, Shiwase's got their private nuclear power plant. And I'm going to tell you, it took them a couple of months after the Supreme Court's decision to build it. The decision was in July. In November, the power plant is online. By December, things go bad. Because a group of terrorists, eco-terrorists, Terra First, attempt to breach the reactor. Nuclear material contaminates the area. A special force team attack assigned to the task by Terra First used military-grade weapons. They had explosives. They were well-equipped, well-prepared. There was a contamination. But these people were then fatally neutralized by Shiwase security forces before they reached the containment building. So basically, they attacked to try to set off the reactor and cause problems. There is evidence now that Terra First was working with other corporations and stuff. The attack was staged and stuff like that to set up things. There's a lot of stuff going on there. This could have been the first actual Shadowrun. But this result, a criminal negligence and reckless endangerment case to be brought by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission against Shiwase. That they had inadequate security measures. The terrorists could breach the entire thing. And there was the recent decision before, and what this created, because it's going to be hard to describe the entire way that this entire thing kind of broke down. But, Shiwase gave the court and government a choice. Shut down all the nuclear plants in the U.S. Effectively. Shiwase, the way they fought, it's kind of like it created corporate extraterritoriality after this. So, it's kind of hard to explain it without getting deep into the way that the entire lawyers fought this thing. But it's the implicity of, like, who can build stuff like the nuclear reactor and the various rights, and they kind of argue that when a regulation or law resulted in actually threatening security, health, and morals or the welfare of people, the government should no longer retain such permissions. And so, they wanted the freedom on their area to fulfill security requirements. Effectively, what this is saying is, rather than, because remember, with the previous decision, local police were involved in helping guard the plant and stuff like that. There was a security force, the local police knew what was going on, kind of stuff like that. They're like, hey, if you want us to be safe, we can't rely on this kind of stuff here. We want the complete freedom to do our security requirements the way we are without your intervention to make it more actual private. So this is corporate extraterritoriality, that they have the perfect right to defend this area the way they want it. The Supreme Court favored in case of Shiwase. They knew the decision would have consequences, but they knew it was like a catch-22. The way things had been argued by Shiwase in this lawsuit would mean that if they decided to side with the U.S. government, with the way they were talking about things, the way that the case kind of evolved, they might have to force nuclear reactors to shut down across the U.S. because of the nature of them and things like that. That's a long story short of it. So it was kind of like this catch-22 of things. And so they wanted to limit this reach, though. The Supreme Court still knew they were doing stuff that would make a problem by siding with Shiwase. So they detailed the activities for which jurisprudence allowed them to affirm and could affect, without a doubt, security, health, morals, and warfare. Things like nuclear power plants. There's a lot of things. Corporates and their providers and subcontractors were given, and then from then on, complete freedom to contract. So the government could no longer regulate beyond customer contracts. Salaries, working hours, security procedures, measures, use of equipment, procedures became free of regulations, as long as they did not affect the product or the service sold. The judges tried to restrict the freedom of this contract to the working place, preventing employees from infringing on employees' rights outside the working place. Corporate property became basically sovereign, and gave corporations like almost nation states. Just think about that. The way they had to state this was such this weird line that created a nation within nations by this decision. That is the nature of a megacorp in the Shadowrun world. And this decision created them. Right here, right now. It was a heck of a thing. Alright. So, now we have megacorporations being born. Congratulations, everybody! We're one step away from the apocalypse, in a way. Yeah, megacorporations. Woo! Yeah. So the French government refused to recognize this, of course, and was the sole opposition for a long time. There was a lot of things that happened because of that. Yeah. There was a lot of anti-corporate kind of stuff because of this entire thing. Anyway, we skip onward in time, because time rushes forward, and then the resource rush is the big thing to begin in 2002. And to describe the resource rush, it's basically the corporations of North America have newfound freedom. They are out there. They demanded they were access to the oils, minerals, and land on federal lands, basically. And because of the nature of the way of changing things, they basically could force the government to use eminent domain to take control of spaces. And one of the big areas that happened here were, of course, in the land grabs, federal parklands, and Indian reserves. So, corporate influence and paramilitary power made it difficult for conservationists and Indian rights groups to fight this. So, a more radical group within the Native American community was formed because of this. The Sovereign American Indian Movement. Which, again, so, corporations gain sovereignty over their own territory, gain influence over the U.S. government, force the U.S. government, because of their new influence and own self-military and the tensions going on in the world, to basically get rid of a lot of places that have resources. Hey, they happen to be parks and Indian reservations. Wow. This is just bad. And it is a thing that, it continues throughout the 2009s. The 2009s are a tumultuous period because of this. The 2000s, the aughts. Some things are happening in the world. Flash floods, some of the worst in the world. A lot of strange new creatures are being discovered. New exploration is going on. Technology is advancing. A couple disasters occur. Things like the 10-minute war take place between Libya and Israel. That's a thing that happened. A lot of stuff occurred. That there's earthquakes in Manhattan. Hey. Yeah. Let's see here. The Second Korean War begins during this time period. There's a lot more upheaval because of destabilization in the power structure of world governments. Also, in 2006, Japan refounds itself as the Japanese Imperial State, which will be important to know about. Because now it can do military stuff, because it was involved in the Second Korean War, and North Korea launched a missile towards Japan, which then kind of caused this. Yeah, things aren't going well. But still, nonetheless, things aren't the worst they can be. And we pass forward towards 2009. This is the next big year we're going to have. As much as I could talk about a lot of the things that happened in the 2000s, just think of it as mega corporations. Corporations now have become very powerful and are causing destabilization effects throughout the world. Also, natural disasters, weird things happening, governments losing power, a lot of stuff that is occurring that is causing the world to be more dangerous, more tumultuous. A lot of things are happening. There's a number of small wars and battles and stuff like this, which is drastically causing issues. And then, the big thing that happens is September 18th, the Lone Eagle incident. That's what we have to talk about now. So, the Shiloh Raiders is a group, and they threatened to launch... okay, so, the tension of everything erupted finally in 2009. On May 5th, United Oil Industries announced they had acquired the right to exploit the petrochemicals in 1/10 of the Indian lands and remaining federal and 1/4 of the federal parks, which the government had confiscated. The SAIM reacted immediately. A small band entered the Shiloh launch facility in northwest Montana and captured a missile silo. So the thing about this is, no one knows how this small group of raiders managed to get past the security patrols and bypass security and get inside the missile silo. No one knows. This is one of those mysteries, is a group of armed individuals took over a U.S. missile silo facility. So, they met up with John Redbourne, an important member of this. He's a USAF major and a full-blown Dakota Sioux. He knocked his partner unconscious and basically helped them once they were inside. John Redbourne was on the site there. And when the raiders came, he sided with them because of his Native American heritage, and probably he could see what was happening to his people. So, they wanted the land's return, or they threatened to launch the missiles. There was 10 days of negotiation when Delta Team attacked, basically, the site. During the struggle, everyone that was inside was killed. All the Native Americans were killed. A lone Eagle missile was launched. A missile was headed for Soviet Union, which might have been Russia technically at the time, because I'd have to check how the world history is. The original book was, let me check how it was, I think it was just Russia, yeah, at the time. So yeah. I forget the first book, because I was looking at the first book. The Soviet Union is still around. Second book, it was Russia Republic. And so they did change that in the history. So their auto-destruct signals were unheeded. So they had to shoot it down. So the president of the U.S. informed Moscow of the target of each of the missiles' multiple warheads. Because they didn't want a full-scale retaliation from Russia. And used the warning for their own defenses. You know, they put themselves on alert. No one was aware how close nuclear war was at this point in time. So a bunch of people, now granted, they were people that, you know, you can see why they're angry and why they did something listless, broke into a place, stole nuclear missiles, launched them. The warhead was stopped. There was fallout for this incident, though. So, nuclear war was averted. Barely. The missile had disappeared over the Arctic Circle. Whether it's the success of the United States or Russia to shoot it down, it just disappeared over the Arctic Circle. No one really knows what happened to that missile. But that's when things get really bad for Native Americans. The Re-Education and Relocation Act was passed in the United States. It ordered all natives with the remotest connection to the SAIM to detention centers. Canada had its Relocation Act, which they had internment camps for the First Nation people, and dismantled the Inuit territory of Nunavut. So, by now, 2010, corporations have, of course, caused a major issue by coming extraterritorialities, destabilizing the world combined with natural disasters. Then, in the U.S. here, the taking of the natives' land resulted in a battle back, resulted in almost nuclear war, resulted in, of course, the shift being blamed to Native Americans. Hey, they're the ones that took over this place. And basically what was behind this? Corporate propaganda, because they still wanted that land. Yeah. Oh boy. And hey, guess who got all that land they wanted? United Oil Industries. Woo! Yeah. Now there's a person that was sent here. Daniel Komen. This is an important name because Daniel Howling Coyote, as he became known by history, was sent to one of these camps. And he is the start of a lot of things. Hey, guess what these camps were outsourced to? Corporations. They were dropped from media spotlight. They were overcrowded, poor sanitation, no medical care. There was plague from the inmates. You know, whether or not this was deliberately some kind of genocidal thing, Coleman would claim that is the important thing. It's one of his excuses for things that will happen in the future. And what happened in 2010, ironically, means that these camps, where they were in horrible conditions, were spared by a lot of stuff that would happen in the 2010s. So we get to 2010, shit's gonna go down. These people, mostly spared, in terrible shape, mostly spared, and, you know, get into things with that. So, hey, we've, reached an important thing that kind of marks stuff similar to, what we've talked about in our world here. So, and I will note, as much as I kind of pass it off, Japanese Imperial State is a major turning point in history, too. That is an important thing to think about, because the world power of Japan in this future is not to be scoffed at. They are probably one of the more powerful countries left in the world, I will tell you. With how everything rearranged, them making that decision at the time, everything going to real shit, gave them a really great to take up a big power vacuum. Now, granted, still mega corporations rule in the by the 2080s. Truly, they are the most powerful of nations. But individual nations, Japan is one of the bigger ones. So they got to be a military power, and you know. Anyway, there were a number of viral outbreaks that occurred in the 2010s, from 2010 to 2018. And each of these epidemics, along with the resurgence of magic in the world, well, I wouldn't call these all epidemics. These are epidemics in a way. One of them is definitely viral. The other is an epidemic of change. And this was thought to be the kind of culmination of what could be called the end of the world, in a way. And the first thing that happened is VITAS. The virally induced toxic allergy syndrome started in India. And it put the Black Death to shame. By the end of 2010, about a quarter of the world's population was dead. 2010. Think about that. 2010, I could say easily at least 6 billion people. Over 1 billion people dead. Billion. And the thing is, people that were well economically rich or well cared for could actually die from it. It was just so deadly. Yeah. Because VITAS was terrible. It claimed a lot of lives. It caused a lot of trouble. And of course, most of the fatalities were from areas where medical care was unavailable or very high population centers. China, India, many African nations, where they're much more densely populated. Third world cities suffered more disproportionately. So the thing is, medical care could still help. Some places like US probably didn't have a true quarter of the population dying, but places in the world where more than a quarter died. But this led to chaos and violence. So, 2010 sucked. Now, other things in 2010 noted. In January, federal government seized all Native American lands. Hey. Yeah. Yeah. A couple of other corporations got their extraterritorial status. Bunch of countries break under this entire thing. Quebec succeeds from Canada. Secedes. That's a weird little thing that happens there during this time period. But in January of 2011, what could be known as the Year of Chaos. Well, this is the time that the first baby with the UGE is born. So that's an important thing to note here. The unexplained genetic expression. What the hell is this? Well, hey, this is the first thing that hints at the return of magic, which we'll get a lot more of here. UGE. It's another one of those terms. We've got Vetus, killed a lot of people. People are still being born, you know? Elves and dwarfs. It's a new, some kind of genetic kind of birth. It was in March of that year that these children were being described as elves and dwarfs, that they're being born, and they are vastly different. Now, these do have hostility discrimination against them. You know, the Japanese created ghettos for their metahumans, and their policies have been pretty terrible. There are racist groups that were created, human first groups. A lot of this was started from this here, and there is more to come. But this is the first time that these children are being born. The Mexican government dissolved as a result of the outbreak during January of this year. Refugees swarmed the border in the hundreds of thousands of the U.S. The black tide hits the North Sea coast. Natural disaster of basically poisoned water. That's kind of awful for a lot of people. The British and the IRA go to basically war. Yeah. A couple of the governments collapse, like the Indonesian one. A lot of other things happen. Yetis are discovered. Actual Yetis in Nepal. It's conclusively discovered that Yetis are a real thing. Whether they were before or not, now they are in November. Hey, that's an exciting year. But 2011 isn't over yet, because in December is the Awakening. That's when everything in the world changes. The Awakening. The Mayan calendar with the 2011 or 2000 end of the world stuff. You know, in a way, they were right. December 24th. 100 Japanese on a bullet train going past Mount Fuji witnessed the appearance of the first great dragon, Rumio. At the exact same moment, Daniel Howling Coyote, who would be known later on as the shaman, a Native American shaman, and the prophet of the Great Ghost Dance. One who gave rise to later on a lot of stuff. led his followers out of the re-education camp in Texas where he was. According to the camp guards, all the shots fired at Hallencoat failed to touch him. Several guards insisted bullets were stopped by a glow that surrounded him. Magically changed weather patterns and landscapes in several places. In Australia, mana storms swept the outback. In Ireland, forests began to rapidly grow for no apparent reasons. Ancient sig roads, peat bogs, coal mines began to re-emerge from the land. In Great Britain, standing stones erupted from the earth. Yeah. No one knew what was going on. Not until January of the next year. They would not know what was going on. But think about all this crap just happening. Yeah, the first mana storm in Australia. That's a pleasant one. The Awakening is magic's return. That's the reason that the Shadowrun world is called the Sixth World. Because the Fifth World was what preceded it. And it's linked to that entire Mayan calendar, end of the world that, was popular back in that time. Oh, the Mayan calendar's ending. Yeah. Turns out they were right. But the destruction of the world wasn't a global apocalypse in the same kind of sense. It was a new world being arrived. Maybe they were predicting when magic was coming back. But effectively, the idea is that there's a 3,000-year-old lull in magical energies and magic returns to the world. And the Century Fair, which I didn't mention, was the first awakened species to arrive before 2011. Basically, as I said, new species were being discovered. It was a kind of process that everything was kind of going about. Those dragons were here. They were just asleep. They were here. Just asleep. So yeah. No one knew what was going on. But the Sixth World was born there. But probably before we get into the explanation of the Awakening a little bit, because we really wouldn't know about that, maybe we should talk about the... well, we can talk about that, and then we'll talk about the Great Ghost Dance. Because the Great Ghost Dance is something to talk about after all this. Anyway, we would learn what was going on in 2012. January 27th, to be exact. So, there were more great dragons emerging. More signs of magic returning. Of course, the Pope denounces metahumans, and then the French Catholic Church opposes him. So there's a big discussion on metahumans and stuff. Yeah, dragons return. Everyone's favorite dragon daddy, dunkle zahn, makes his first big appearance. Good old dunkle zahn. He appears in Cherry Creek Lake in Denver, where not only does he grant a 12-hour interview to one Holly Brighton, he explains what's going on. He says, "Hey dudes, I'm a goddamn dragon. I've been asleep for a few thousand years, didn't have enough magic. Guess what's been coming back? Magic, bitches. And it's here to stay. At least for thousands of years to come. Enjoy!" Granted, he said it in a much more reasonable and meaningful way. But a 12-hour interview with Holly. Yeah. Man. It's kind of interesting that dunkle zahn is such an interesting character. There's more to him. But yeah. Ancient dragon. A Western dragon. Yeah. And, you know, he used that that interview to basically at least let people know to a degree what was going on in the world. To explain what the awakening was. And he awakened in Cherry Creek, Lake Denver. That was where he was resting. So. And there's more to this character. Honestly, I could probably have a short thing talking about Dunkle Zahn as a character, because I will tell you, he becomes a president in the country that would be the United States in the future. And a lot of other things happened. And yes, we can't even talk about the Fourth World, where is effectively the Earth Dawn universe, which is technically connected to our universe. And do we haven't even talked about fucking horrors? That is a thing that we're not probably going to get to in the Shadowrun timeline, but you could always use them if you really wanted to, because they're a thing. Oh boy. Yeah. It's less connected now, but originally Shadowrun and Earth Dawn were connected systems. So that's a thing to keep in mind. Anyway, so 2012 saw a lot more dragons being awakened, more problems going on, more magic appearing. Some things like the Nuyen becomes the official state currency of Japan during this time period. I will tell you that's critically important, because remember when I said Japan, the Japanese Imperial state in the future is one of the most important actual government. Because of a lot of shit that happens, the most stable currency in the world is not the dollar. Dollar disappears long ago. It's the Nuyen. So it's virtually accepted in every country in the world. And it's the official currency of a number of countries that don't create their own in the future. But now it's created, so it's really important to know, hey, this important money sign, which is one of the universally created ones, hey, it's there. So we should probably talk during this time period. There's a couple more things that have happened that I'll talk about, but we should talk about the dance, the Great Ghost Dance, because honestly, it is one of the most major things that happens during this time period, and it results in a change. And, of course, this was the change of North America. It began in 2014. So, okay, so 2014, we can finish up 2013. A couple of mega corporations have a small battle between each other. And that results in a creation of a inter-corporate council. It's the start of megacorps having a way of policing each other. So basically, two megacorporations kind of battle it out, and the result is, there's a corporate court created, which all the major megacorporations are a member of. Yeah. So, 2014, the Great Ghost Dance, and the birth of the Native American nations. Yes, this is a major thing that happens. Of course, some other crap is happening. There's some more breakings with religious problems, more great dragons, and Daniel Howling Coyote announces the formation of the Native American nations. He demands every European, African, and Asian descent leaves North America immediately. But magic is also returning because there's magic terrorism that results in the United Kingdom signing a treaty that basically creates the United Free Republic of Ireland, which is the combined nation of Ireland as itself. Basically, Ireland is once again whole, because also magically enhanced terrorist activity. But now, in July 12th of 2014, the Great Ghost Dance begins. A volcano erupts. The red Redondo volcano does. Tornadoes arrive. So, the best way to describe the Great Ghost Dance is it's guerrilla warfare using magic by the Native American nation. And making it very difficult for conventional wars to go against them. Effectively, because of the spiritual aspects of the Native American people, they were some of the first to, and they're not the only ones, there are plenty of other people that found, using their own spiritualism and studies and connections with the ancient world, were able to reconnect with magic quicker than a lot of other people. You have to think of any culture that has a lot of heavy rituals that are based on shamanistic things or, arcane things, has a better chance of reconnecting with it in this world of awakening magic. Guess who you shoved all together into one place, pissed off, and basically has that connections? Yeah. So, it was, hell of a thing, the dance. So Daniel had kind of his escaped, has been building up his group now, announced from the shadows the formation of this nation. He plans to go to war with North America. And he plans to use magic to do it. People laughed at him. Of course, magic was becoming more commonplace. But, at the time, no one believed anybody could control it. Magic phenomena were a thing. Magic coming back to the world was a thing. But, the idea that someone could control magic, just a laughing stock at the time. People were like, they're just threatening. They're just taking advantage of this stuff happening. Oh, it's cool. Magic's returning. Can we understand it? It's a new form of energy and stuff. The volcanic eruption of Rendero Peak was said to be his doing. Now, U.S. government doesn't take it serious, They try to go after his movement. Bunch of tornadoes prevented that. The guerrilla warfare went on. And both federal and corporate forces were unable to get a hold of these people. Frustrations became bigger and bigger. There was news blackouts. Information wasn't getting leaked. Turmoil was just going on all over the place. Governments were basically breaking apart. We'll talk about the culmination now of the Great Ghost Dance. This was the group, basically, that was leading for the creation of the Native American nation. The president was assassinated in 2016, the current one. Jesse Garrity. Then the Russian president of the time, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, and the Minister of Ireland. All these people assassinated. William Jarman became the new president and issued the now infamous Executive Order 17321. Congress ratified it with a Resolution Act of 2016. It was the total extermination of Native American tribes, what they signed. Basically, it had been a battle at the time up till now for 2 years with the Grace Ghost Dance and the emerged Daniel Howling Coyote. That was kind of a battle and acted as like local terrorists. Now it was extermination. Government went with megacorps, used them. So the true Great Ghost Dance began in 2017. The natives of all the tribes across the continent performed a ritual that Howling Coyote taught them. So as the government's moving to use this Resolution Act, freak weather, uncanny disturbance on military bases and supply dumps, assigned to the plan, happened. More delays. Generals were sacked. They began to assemble their troops, and on 2017, on August 17th, they began to roll out. And then, that morning, Mount Hood, Mount Rainier, Mount St. Helens, Mount Adams, all erupted. Now we'll take a pause because we want to hit a couple of other years before we hit what this means for 2018. But think about that now. Group comes out with magic, friends to use it, wants the Native American nations. They've taken extreme stance, but with the abuse that they've had, understandable extreme stance. Battle with them. Bunch of assassinations. An extremist gets in charge of the U.S. government. Signs war. Not just war. Genocidal war with these people. It is bad. 2015. Hong Kong succeeds. Mexico gets renamed Aztlan as effectively the country gets rebuilt finally. You know, remember I said the Mexican government had collapsed. They kind of rebuilt it. The Aztlan Party, the founding of the nation of Aztlan, happens during this time. Which is important to say because I will tell you, Aztlan is a corporate nation state. One of the few ones that are out there. Because Aztechnology is basically the nation of Aztlan. Yeah. They're effectively one and the same. Not kind of. It's kind of a hard thing to talk about, but yeah. The Aztlan government created Aztechnology as their economic side. But this is the birth of that. This is the start of it. Hey, 2015 saws the Magic Hat opening in Minneapolis, a private organization of practicing magicians. People are finding out about magic and beginning to use it during now. So that's an important thing that happens now. 2016. More horrible, toxic things going on. Of course, all the assassinations that I talked about. The vice president causing a lot of issues. And then 2017 with the Great Ghost Dance, of course. Oh boy. There was an earthquake that destroyed China's nuclear stockpile in the Hatai Mountains of 2017. Oh, and Hawaii gets independence. The Kingdom of Hawaii declares independence. So yeah, that's an important thing to note. That also happened during this time period. If you really care about it, yeah, they're their own thing now. So, it's, if you want to check it out, you know, there's a national entire thing about it, you know. So that's an interesting little things that happen. And Hong Kong gets independence from China and British government. Yeah. So, China continues to have massive amounts of civil wars during this time. Let's talk about April 25th. It's April 25th when the Treaty of Denver occurs. April 25th of 2018 is the death of the United States. That's the best way to say it. It's the end of it. It's the weather, the damage, the massive amounts of destruction with all these volcanoes going off meant that it was basically the end of all things. And that would be leading to what's called the Treaty of Denver. So yeah, 2018. Effectively, after all these volcanoes went off, the concept of this military force annihilating all these people kind of disappeared. Think about that. All of a sudden, they're like, hey, fuck with us. All these volcanoes, which weren't really active, go off at once. Look what we can do. So, the federal government still tried to do something, but the United States, Canada, and Mexico sent representatives to Denver to negotiate with the Ghost Dancers. Right at the beginning of the year, after this kind of shit had happened. They showed their power. And so 3 months they hammered out the Treaty of Denver. So the three governments combined acknowledged the sovereignty of the Native American nations over most of Western North America. It was a 10-year population adjustment plan that recreated all non-Indians off lands belonging to NAN. Provisions included the establishment of reservations for non-tribal people and corporations, maintenance of certain cities, like Seattle, as extraterritorial extensions of the governments that had formerly claimed the land, and retention of most of the state of California by the United States. So most of California was kept. Denver would be a treaty city under joint administration of both signing parties. So no one was really happy with the Treaty of Denver. The Native American nation didn't have the strength to drive out everybody, unfortunately. Maybe, let's see here. Let me see about let me turn this off for a second. Let me see if I can find a North American map for Shadowrun. Shadowrun. North American map. Yeah, let's go see here. Let's see if that's a decent picture. That is a small, tiny picture. That is a pretty decent picture. That'll do. That'll do. Let's open this one up. Let's increase the size of it a little bit. Yeah, let me just adjust this here. So, a little tiny, but I can kind of increase that size here. Kind of throw that over me. As you can see, that this is the way that Shadowrun looks nowadays. You can see Quebec is independent. The California Free State's on here. And the Native American nations broke apart. But we'll talk about that. And as Lance is there, the Caribbean League is there. And both the UCAS and the Confederate States of America are there. So those are things that we're going to talk about. I'll leave that picture here for the last little bit of talking about this here. So, yeah. Treaty of Denver was not something anybody was really happy with. But, you know, the Native American nation had the magical capacity to kind of offset the nuclear capacity of the other three North American nations. They proved themselves with those eruptions that they could create as much damage magically as a nuclear weapon. Howling Coyote became the head of the Sovereign Tribal Council of the NAN body, but it was difficulty. The factions argued with the Tribal Council suggested, a lot of things happen. Anyway, the first generated assist artificial sensory induction system technology was created this year too. But again, the Native American nation would break apart. It wouldn't stay together as one, and Aslant was sort of involved with that, yeah. So, things went okay. Of course, we haven't had the birth of the UCAS yet, technically. That we have to talk about, and we'll probably switch books here. So, Canada, kind of defeat, like really much smaller. United States has lost a lot of terrain. They still have California. Seattle and Denver are two treaty cities, you call them. Seattle being this major port, and being used to kind of like push the a combination of like things there. It's almost like an independent thing between the nations. And of course Denver, the treaty city. And we have this new kind of set of nations being born. Seattle gets a lot of refugees. Counties merge with the city over the course of a year. So basically, Seattle becomes a major metroplex, much different than it was. It evolves because a lot of in the next year, a lot of people are moving into it. The first cyber limb is created. Cyber technology becomes a major thing here. And now we have to talk the 2020s. Let's switch our books here with a quick little thing. Let us get the Shadowrun 2nd edition book. Which doesn't look a lot different than the 1st edition book. I'm gonna admit it looks pretty similar. They didn't really change a lot for when it came to how the book looks. We'll readjust this here, as we've been doing here. Boop. 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 A little high there. Shadowrun 2nd edition. Book doesn't change a lot, physically. We've reached the 2020s. Hoo-ha! Good times are rolling. We've been through a lot of crap now, The United States still technically exists, but mostly broken apart, hasn't died yet. Lost half of its nation. We've got this whole new nation of Native Americans. A lot of things are happening. Refugees are changing. The world is on like us things. Magic's returning. There was a lot of population death. So you also think about, it sounds like this is a lot difficult. When a quarter of the population has already died to a plague, we are talking about a quarter of the population has already died to the plague. There's a lot less people. There's a lot less issues to worry about. So, 2020 doesn't see a lot of crazy things happen. I mean, we got some stuff with more corporations. The first cyber limb is like that's a big thing here. There's some problems with, more meta-humanity and issues with that and racism and stuff. And, hey, Japan launches a series of solar power collecting satellites to beam power to Earth in the version of microwaves. Good on them. The space program, the NASA gets bought up by the Ares Corporation, and they launch their own space program. Then, let's talk 2021, because it's our next major year of stuff. Because 2021 sees Goblinization. That's what the media called it. April 30th. 10% of the world's population suddenly mutates. This also occurs to children in utero. and they change into orcs and trolls. Yeah. Now, how people react to it, a lot differently. Quebec's really good. Quebec expends full rights to basically all their goblinized citizens. Good on Quebec, honestly. They're one of the few that does right by these people that all of a sudden changed into orcs and trolls. No one knows why these humans just, at one point in time, 10% just changed into these two other metatypes. And they just did in front of people. You'd be sitting there and all of a sudden, boom. And as much as elves and dwarves were met with some hostility, because orcs and trolls look very different, they met with massive amount of hostility. There were riots. A lot of things that bad happened. And eventually rights would be given places like the UCAS, the United Canadian American States. But that's much later. We're not talking about that there. Like, there's a president of the Dominican Republic gets transformed into an orc, so his country will accept any goblinized immigrant. The Swiss government quarantines them. It's a disease. The German government starts taking them up. Japanese government, at this point, annexes Yom Islands, the Philippines, both those places, and deports their metahumans to there. You know. The Shadowrun governor rounds them up to the camps that once held Native Americans in their area. A lot of bad things happen really crazily. And that's not the end. That's the end of 2021. 2021, yeah, Goblinization. 2022, well, the result of this is not good. That's the kind of way to look at it. We've got technology exploding. Hey, cyberware. Goblinization. That's when something else happens. Vetus returns in autumn of 2022. There are basically race riots throughout the world. Great dragons continue to appear. Megacorps continue to develop. Technology continues to travel. Unethical experiments are done by the Johns Hopkins Institute of Health on metahumans. Think about that. Johns Hopkins. Vetus 2, another version of Vetus, claims another 10% of the world's population. 1 in 10 people die from what was left. The Caribbean League is formed in 2022. Basically, Cuba, Jamaica, Grenada, Bermuda, and the Virgin Islands joined together to form a nation and get a lot of those. The Commonwealths of Australia and New Zealand formed the Australian-New Zealand Allied Confederation. The term awaken gets used. Yeah. A lot of bad things happen in 2022. It's a rough year. But 2023 sees a bit of a change. Like, we had a year where things were violent and deadly and dangerous, and a lot of people have a lot of issues. And, of course, you know, other things are happening here. The Humanist Poly Club is formed now, which is a human supremacist bigots that came into existence. They're still there. Hey, private police forces become a thing. Lone Star, not a huge mega corporation, but they take over from the Seattle Police Department and become the law enforcement in Seattle, because the Seattle Police Department went on strike. The governor just got rid of them and then just put in Lone Star. Something that changes the way a lot of things happen, and not in the best way. I'm going to be honest about that way. Kind of sets a tone that's just not a great tone for the future here. Yeah, Lone Star, private security people having power. Now they do. Have a lot of it. But again, we aren't in the worst situation now. We've got, you know, magic back and a lot of new technology, cyberware. And people's metahuman rights are something that is good. Because something that happens during this year, during 2023, is the Supreme Court gives equal rights to metahumans in the United States. Think about that. The United States, just right then and there, does that. Hey, more power to us. At least the Supreme Court did that kind of thing. They're like, metahumans have the same rights as other humans. Corporate court continues to grow their power. And, yeah. 2024. SimSense. SimSense, which is artificial sensory, which is a thing, a kind of video player that goes into your mind and gives you senses, is developed. That's the big thing here, you know. Experimental electronic voting system. The 29th Amendment has passed during this time. A third-term president is elected, Jarman. A lot of things happen. Some more technology. Nothing major. We're kind of settling into a lot of the stuff is going on here is important, but really the next time we get a big thing is 2029. Now, some kind of things I can say is like, hey, in 2025, cyber technology can be used in national sports. One of the linebackers, it gets a cyber modified player. The thing is, there was concerns about advantages. The current restrictions of modifications are those that need to be due to injury. So it's sort of like, you can get cyberware if you got injured in a way, and you can still do athletic sports at very least. You know, there's another of new movements, more magic develops, more companies like Seder Krupp. By 2026, magic is pretty much a major league thing. Combat bike becomes a sport. Hey, well, that's something to talk about if we talk about sports. A lot of like governments and technology things are studying magic. Now, people that study magic and break into it, hermetic mages have become a thing now. By now, they already kind of were since magic reemerged. You know, people that study it on the scientific side, but now they're really like looking at you know, there's laws of magic and stuff. So it's more than just the shamanic things. 2027 sees fusion power. Cool. Hey, we in our year we're working on fusion. By 2027 in this world, hey, you know, that we see the actual proper fusion being used. You know, good on that. There's a huge earthquake in LA in 2028. Dunkle gets a new voice, someone that talks for him, because he's still been talking to people. Dunkle the one that talks to people. And of course, we do see when was the Native American nations broken apart? I have to look that up because I'm not remembering from the Treaty of Nations. Sorry, just gotta remember when they broke apart. Because we want to go to 2029, the next big thing in our time period. So we've already gone through a lot of stuff. You know, effectively the Native American nations are all separate from each other, but a group. So you have to think about them. It's several nations, basically. So, like, when I showed the map, all of those groups together are technically the Native American nations. You'd say that they're kind of like, they talk with each other, but they are independent nations. Anyway. So 2029 saw a major change in the way the world works because of the crash virus. It's a virus of unknown origin, and this is a computer virus. It attacks computer systems worldwide, crashing systems, wiping software, burning hardware. The entire data network of the world collapsed in a few months. It toppled governments, destroyed corporations. The world economy was brought to a brink. So this was the next big thing that occurred. You know, the world, the internet as we knew it, just is completely destroyed. There's a group of cyber commandos known as Echo Mirage, which eventually contained and got rid of it. But a lot of damage had been done since then. It could reduce lethal biofeedback in members of the cyber commando team. That's the first thing that people learned from this virus. Lethal biofeedback in these people that basically had kind of like, think of like rudimentary cyber connections to the entire thing and virtual things, and they were connected to the computers. The Crash and the Echo Mirage are like very interesting, that they are like, you know, a group that it had connections early on in this cyber thing and diving into the internet kind of same way. They were earlier users of cyber combat as it would evolve in 2029. This was like the first version of it. So yeah, the world was kind of collapsing now economically and virtually because of everything that happened. A lot of places closed borders. A lot of places were in complete disarray. Japan was having issues with corporate things, and like, you have to think of it. All these countries now, just everything just kind of collapsed in a way. And you can see that most countries in the world were suffering if they hadn't kind of had this kind of damage. There was an entire thing that happened now that we should mention, is the Shiwase Council, one of the Native American nations, opened its borders to metahumans, not just Native American ones. So UG elves from a variety of tribes moved to Mount Rainier area, form a new tribe, the Sinchurch, and then dwarfs, orcs, and trolls moved to areas as well, but in smaller numbers. Effectively, this was the first time that this, like, they're like, hey, we can see that you're being discriminated against the same way kind of we were. Join us, we will make you one of us. And then this led to the Native American nations opening their borders to all metahumans. This is the first one that did it in November. But then a new world is born in 2030. Remember, I was going to go to 2035 for this one. Before we switch over to 3rd edition. So, a lot of things have been going on. More technology. But now we have the death of the USA and the birth of UCAS. President McAllister of the time and Canadian Prime Minister Howard Fraser signed a treaty, the Act of Union, to merge the remaining states of America with what left of Canada to form the United Canadian American States. It includes Canada's major industrial centers and, more importantly, her remaining natural resources. It was October 15th of 2030 that the UCAS was born. The Caribbean League continues its influence over their entire area. There's some more battles, more... Sydney declares independence from Australia. You know, there's a lot of things going on. You know, India launches nukes against Pakistan, and all this stuff happens there. Then in 2031 is the first Euro War. Russian forces invade Poland, invoking the first Euro War. That's what we have to talk about. 2 wars in Europe. One is in 2030, the other would be in 2037. Russia invades Finland and Poland, defeating the Polish military in 3 months. And when they crossed the borders, the Polish-German border in 2031, nations of Western Europe formed a European Defense League, replaced the defunct NATO, and stopped their advance. They attacked Czech Republic, Hungary, Austria. European forces just fought back against the invaders. And then a new faction entered the battle in 2033, suspected to be United Kingdom, and basically caused an armistice. And then there was a second European war, which we'll talk about. It's just chaos. Basically, chaos. The Scandinavian Union is formed between Denmark, Norway, and Finland during this time, during the war. You know, we get a new president of the UCAS. Basically, the Andrew McAllister, the current president, becomes the president, and the Canadian Prime Minister becomes the first vice president of the UCAS. And they have a new constitution. Cyber terminals, the size of a desk, become commercially available. Cyber terminals being it's large, but it's like super advanced computers, even much farther than us. We think of like our tiny handheld computers. Oh, they're impressive. These things would have... But the thing is also, you have to remember, our old systems got burned out by a horrible virus, so we have to rebuild things from scratch. Hey. The first mention of the Matrix occurs in 2032. It is the cyber system that replaces the internet as we know it after the crash of 2029. That crash virus. It was 2032 that the Matrix systems begin to exist, as it was known for many a year. So yeah. Let's see here. The human metahuman vampire virus is isolated. People learn about, hey, there's a vampire virus. That's a great one. Yeah. I think we can skip ahead a little bit here, timeline-wise, because there's new nations being formed. During the 2034, California succeeds away. The Confederation of American States succeeds from the UCAS on November 10th of 2034, peacefully. Basically, unlike the last Civil War, there was some disagreements because of a lot of things going on. Again, there's a wholly new nation, and the Confederation of American States wants to break away. They do. They successfully do through peacefully, and they've been relatively good terms with the UCIS. So hey. Yeah. Tirnanog is formed, so Ireland becomes Tirnanog, more magical nation. Amazonia, in the middle of the Amazon, a more magical-based nation using the power of the Amazon. I could bring out the Shadowrun world map and just show you that things change. Oh, hey, Liam O'Connor becomes first president of Tirnanog, you know. Atlanta becomes capital of the CAS. Man. It's during this time that a lot of And here's something that's really interesting. The corporate court in 2035 saves the United Nations from dissolution. Think about that. The United Nations was going to dissolve because it had moved its quarters to Geneva after an earthquake in New York that I talked about. You know, it was eventually relocated back to New York City. And things were going bad with the nations of the world working together. So the United Nations was honestly breaking apart. Nations were changing, new nations were forming, old nations were going away. And the corporate court wisely kept them around. Think about it this way. Except for as technology, most megacorps, even during this time period, don't really want to own a nation. It's not fun, requires a lot of work, requires a lot more work and resources than they really want to deal with. So what's the best way to avoid that? Make sure actual governments still exist. What's the best way to prevent actual governments from murdering each other and dealing with their own issues? United Nations. So, there are now 2 levels of government controlling the world. There are the state governments with a combined sort of United Nations, and there's the megacorps with their combined corporate court. Granted, the one that has more power can technically be argued the megacorps because they have independence over the other and basically can just do what they want. You know. So yeah. Texas tried to leave the CAS. Parts of New Mexico and Oklahoma joined them. California succeeds into its own free state in 2036. Japan tries to help out because they try to Tirnanog, which is the country, an elven nation to the north of California, invades. Japan helps out, doesn't leave San Francisco. You know, California succeeded and they had a lot of stuff to deal with. So yeah, the Japanese Imperial grants control of its national currency to New York, to the Zurich Orbital Gemeinschaft Bank. Yeah, the bank's in orbit in 2036, and it becomes the world's reserve currency. Lofrin has a hostile takeover of BMW Corp at a shareholder meeting, which can best be described as, and I'm saying, the Great Dragon Lofrin. He basically brought a Buick-sized piece of gold and bought, boom, I buy your thing. He basically bought up 63 of the remaining companies, saw, and usurped the control of it. So yeah, a Great Dragon took over BMW Corp. You know, he's very powerful. He does appear in metahuman form, as many of the Great Dragons have that ability. Yeah. And BMW Corp would become Seder Corp in later years, which is still one of the major mega corporations to this day. It is 63 ownership % under a Great Dragon. So it's actually a Great Dragon other than Dunkelson that wanted to be involved with metahuman politics / human politics, and honestly, he one acts more like a normal dragon. Dunkelson was all more like Dunkelson. Hey, the world, they should know about these things. Let's have things good. And Lofren's like, hey, money. Hey, that mega corporation looks nice. I own it. The sin was invented in the UCAS Constitution with Amendment 14 on September 4th of 2036. This is important. The sin is an important part of everyday life nowadays. The system identification number. And all citizens are basically registered for sin. Think of like you have a social security number. That you're given at birth. The sin is something that you, as a citizen, are registered for. it is much more tracking and controlling than a lot of things. So, hey, sin exists. You got the Elven nations now of Tirnanog and I can never remember its name. The one that invaded California to its north. You know, I'm great at that. I'm remembering these. Amazonia, of course, with the Awakenings. And there's, you know, some other things that did happen in here. Basically, nations are changing and crazy shit is happening. And, you know, the world is in, honestly, just, it's a mess. It's a mess. Post-crash, a lot of superpowers and, you know, people breaking apart, doing, breaking away from various people, new nations being parts. It just is a mess. I'm gonna actually check that map because I can't remember. North American map. Oh, it's Tirtangri. That's right. And Tirnanog is the other one. Man, remembering these things sometimes, that's just my bad memory. But we've reached 2036. We're talking about the California Free State and the law firm here. So let's move on to 3rd edition book. I said I was going to do 3rd edition book 2035. Woo! 2035. Woo! And we have the 3rd edition book where we have finally a different cover. I know, it's so unusual and alien. For the longest time now, we just had the same goddamn cover at the front of the book. And now, for once, we got a different color. So alien. That's a terrible picture. Is that a better one? Man, no one has a good picture of the 3rd edition cover. I'm going to be honest. Oddly enough. It'll do. It's very tiny. So make it a little bigger. Basically, the 2nd edition was very similar cover to the other one there. But now we have a new cover. That looks neat. Sorry. We'll probably not be on this too long, because this is not a huge section. Because we're going to be using this point to get to the end of 2nd edition Shadowruns and its history. We've hit up a lot of the major things that have happened there. And, you know, we've seen a lot of big developments. But, we do have to still talk about the Night of Rage in 2039. That's going to be a big one. Yeah. Not a good one either. It's unfortunate that a lot of bad events are still going to happen. So yeah. There isn't... So, you know, Seder Cup becomes the company that it is, being renamed from BMW Cup. Some new sports. Daniel Howling Coyote resigns from head of the Sovereign Tribal Council and just withdraws from society. He did his job changing the way and the thing of his people. He was never heard from again. So he disappears. This is the end of him as a person. In history. No one knows really what happened to him. He just took a step away. Disappeared in 2037. Tirnanog, who's very anti-cybernetic, aka Ireland, kicks out Ares macro technology because they had a cyber-enhanced employees in the country. The UCAS gets involved in the merger between the Chrysler Corporation and Nissan into the Chrysler-Nissan Corporation. There's some attacks. Some bad things are happening. Hey. The year 2038. First Super Bowl held since 2030. That was a thing. Hey, here's a change. Judy Hosted becomes the first woman to win a professional baseball contract signed to the Detroit Tigers. So now, baseball is co-ed. Officially, by 2038. Then we have the Night of Rage. February 7th, 2039. Disenfranchised metahumans around the world take to the streets in protest of discrimination. And some of these turn violent. And this includes when the Seattle Metropolitan Guard rounds up the city's metahumans and confine them in Tacoma's waterfront. Then anti-metahumans set fire to detention centers, sparking riots, causing hundreds of deaths. This event leads to violence worldwide. Hence why it is the Night of Rage. That this is a lot of anti-metahuman stances, hate crimes and stuff were happening, and they were getting worse. All this legal stuff that was like they're out there and basically limiting metahuman rights. So metahumans being detained in many cities for their own protection, but led to more violence. Metahumans losing their homes and livelihoods. So, yeah. This set off some of the worst terror attacks in the world. The Alamos 2000 used explosives and magic to collapse the Sears Tower 3 days later. The area is known as Shatter Graves. A Western dragon, one of the great dragons, destroyed a flight, Euroflight 329, in retaliation for the Night of Rage. The damage here did lead the way for metahuman rights in many places. But a lot of the damage and the feelings were done. Violence was done. A lot of prejudice is still there. And it required a lot of work for the world to start getting better. In a way. I mean, it doesn't. In 2040, the Azkaban Council, one of the Native American nations, is one of the first nations to recognize the anyway, it's the area of Alaska, Western Canada. Anyway, they recognize Sasquatch as a sapient species. I haven't talked about some of the other meta-type of creatures that are out there. Sasquatches, pixies, other things. There are beings out there that are intelligent and are not based on humans. And, yeah. This is the first time a group recognizes one of those. They become more recognized later on. But, you know, a lot of bad things kind of have happened. So, yeah, the Night of the Rage kind of culminates the end of the 2030s. And then, we get into the 2040s. The 2040s, of course, are culminates in a lot of issues. Because this is kind of like more mega corporations are occurring, the world is changing, and everything is just finding stability, I think is the best way to describe the 2040s. A level of stability that begins to occur. There's still issues. Still a lot of crazy things happen. More awakened lands, more violence, earthquakes, national problems going, but terrorists, wars. But the world sees a level of stability beginning to occur. And leads us more into the 2050s. A lot more nations are becoming a lot less scattered. Now, one thing that does occur during the 2040s that's important to note is Paul Grieg, shaman, is one of the first people suspected of bringing insect spirits to the plains. If you don't know what that means, insect spirits are not good. Of all the types of spirits that can be summoned by shamanic people, insect spirits are very bad, as they are a good way to describe them is they kind of use living people and creatures as hosts. They're infections. Yeah. So, because they, take over people and stuff, not really looked well upon. They're kind of infectious and terrible that way. And can create hives on the material plane. So yeah, insect spirits look badly upon. First ones kind of popping into existence. Alright. So, we kind of pop forward, I think, in time to the next big thing. Because we've kind of gone through the major issues. I think we have to move ourselves into the 4th edition book and the 2050s. Because we had a lot of bad things going on, technology well developing. But we want to hit up the 2050s. So let's look at that 4th edition book. We've gone forward in time a little bit further. 4th edition book. Let's look at the 20th anniversary book. I like the... let's do the original 4th edition. I will not use the 20th anniversary, even though that's what I'm using for my stuff right now, just because it's better adapted. It just has better... I like the way it's written out a little bit better. But 4th edition book. Hey, Catalyst Labs, Game Labs is in charge of this now, finally. Catalyst does a good job with Shadowrun, I think. As much as I complain about their job with 6th edition, I think Catalyst overall has done a pretty good job with the when they took over the brand. I don't think, like, 4th, 5th edition, a lot of the storylines and stuff feel like they're good. So, I will not complain about Catalyst's job. But, so we reached the 2050s. This is when you would have been playing Shadowrun 1st edition, would have been 2050. If you got the Shadowrun 1st edition book, that's when this would begin. So that's kind of an idea of the time frame there. This is also, if you played the Shadowrun SNES game, that's when it would have taken place. So this is like peak Shadowrun, when you can see how the world worked exactly. This is like when the initial games and stuff and a lot of the stuff came about. Shadowrun is our thing, definitely by now. But we're not done with major events that happen in the 2050s. Because there's still technology developing, things are becoming kind of stuff. And it's 2053 that we get like a new Great Dragon awakens in Tir Tarnaga. We get cross-applied technologies, gets extraterritoriality, means it gets recognized as a megacorp. So a couple of big things happen. Yamatsu violates a concord of the corporate court in search of forbidden lost technology, and there's almost a corporate war in November. What lost technology means is advanced research fires that were lost in the aftermath of the two crashes. We've only talked about one of the crash. Thing is, some lost technologies are kind of looked at very badly because of way corporates work with each other. Effectively, there have almost been a couple times when the corporations go to war, and that would be pretty bad. Fortunately, we haven't done that yet. Not yet. So yeah. We look upon a lot of these things as like big changes, but a lot of stuff is just little changes the way things work nowadays. New technology certainly is a big thing. The UCAS Congress passes an Endangered Species Act for a number of awakened creatures because there's not a lot of them during 2054. There is leads us to 2055 is the next big event I want to talk about, because it is the death of Chicago, as a way to say it. And in 2055, it was the second largest city in the UCS with a population over 4 millions. Now it's a bug city. It's cut off from the rest of the world. It is, well, done. So yeah. Basically, in 2055, an Ares operation to clean up a major hive of insect spirits that were infesting things spread them throughout the city. The federal government quarantined an area on the 23rd between Lake Measure and Desmond Plains River and called the Chicago Contamination Zone. And they established that it was a new outbreak of the VTIS. But it's really bugs. And an upper-current Ares group infiltrated the power plant near the center of the containment zone to detonate a nuclear bomb. Just before then, an insect queen spirit finished erecting a powerful magical barrier. So the blast was a lot smaller, but the radiation was more intense. Knocked the insect spirits around, put them in a state of torpor. So then this would lead to, on the 58th, that there was a biological area weakening the insect spirits, with troops and drones going into it. The threat was ended, and the quarantine was lifted after 3 years. Most people that were living in that area are believed to be, savage gangers or disguised insect spirits who have taken over bodies. So basically, Chicago is an urban hellhole of violent gangs and problems because of all of this. Yeah. Chicago is a mess. But it was all caused by insect spirits, the things I mentioned. And it all started August 23rd, 2055. A major event that just destroyed an entire city, effectively. And people found out it was insect spirits. Bug City. It won't be the last time that insect spirits have caused a problem. But in the 2056, January 22nd, the UCAS Congress recognized the Great Triangle Dunkle as a legal citizen of the UCAS. And in his human form, there was a famous... Well, I don't know if he took a human form ever. Actually, I don't know. But there was a handshake between him and the U.S. president at the time. So the technocrats, which were the parties, they got to the top of the polls. They did something that basically, like, their people love, you know. They're like, hey, we got a dragon, a citizen of our country. Pretty cool. Pretty cool. And that leads us to 2057. So, the House of Representatives declares the president election of 2056 invalid. There was some issues that were going on, and there was a new election that was being held. Dunkle announces his intention to run for president on March 15th. And I will tell you, this is an important part of this entire thing. On August, when the election is held, Dunkle wins. The Great Dragon becomes president of the UCAS and is sworn into office on August 9th. And became the shortest president in history, as, honestly, it did not last. A few hours after being sworn on August 9th, there was an explosion of his limousine near Watergate Hotel. There's more to that, but if I dive deep into some goddamn lore about this entire thing, his assassination and the results of it and what was going on, that's a Dunkle problem if I want to talk about him, because I should both talk about his life and his legacy. He was the first president to not have a first lady, wife, daughter, anything assorting to that. He's the first non-human and the only dragon to hold office in the UCAS or USA. And again, he's probably the biggest one because, you know, he's a goddamn dragon. Though his human form was smaller than Lincoln's. And apparently he did that on purpose because he didn't want to be the biggest. So yeah. Oh, and he was a blue dragon. His color was blue. So he was the first blue president. And he was the only president born before the Christian era. Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot about Dunkle assassination, or death, or the explosion that killed him, which is weird. Just weird. Kyle Hefner takes his place as president after him. And, yeah. It was certainly something that happened. And the death of Dunkle certainly had after effects. Dunkle had a will. And it established the Draco Foundation to establish all some bequests. There was a chairman of it. The Dunkle Institute of Magical Research was created. Which is actually one of the groups of the best magical minds in the world. So this was established in 2057. And think about it, it was just 23 years later, or 28 years later, we've got this, the best magical minds in the world put together. And in a kind of masterstroke of manipulation from his grave, he basically put two big groups on the scene. The Draco Foundation and the Institute for Magical Research. They have a lot of money, a lot of power, and a lot of influence. Had big effect on the world. Right then and there. So, yeah. Uncle Zane, as much as his death was a sad thing, he certainly had a lot of influence. And his dragon horde just was insane. You know, he had connections and wealth in a lot of places. And the money and influence he sent out there, the artifacts he gave out, both to metahuman acquaintances and fellow dragons. The effects of his death and his will echo for even more years to come. Things like the because of things like his bequests and stuff, things like the Elven language and the Orcish language became things. The Elven language had already kind of been established. It was better. The Orcish language, that these, like, you know, meta types, when they were around before, had more culture, and it could kind of unite some of these groups together a little bit more. Of course, you know, we're not done yet. Because we do have to talk about the 2060s. And, that changed to 5th edition book. We'll throw up over there. Because, hey, 2060s would take us to 2070s. And a lot of stuff, some big stuff happened in the 2060s. Into the 5th edition book. And, I will talk the 2070s. Just a little bit. I'm not as familiar with the 2070s, let me tell you. Haven't read through all the 6th edition book. But there was possibility of more corporate wars and stuff that occurred at the end of the 2050s, because, gosh darn it, the corporations can never, you know, get across. And a lot of the corporations did shadow wars with each other. The current corporate court is very different than the one that originally. It's changed over the years, and we'll talk about that. But now we are reaching the 2060s. You know, we've hit the major end of the age of these things. You know, the corporations have done their job of causing a lot of troubles, and AIs are a big thing. That's a big thing to say at the end of 2060s. AIs, like proper AIs, are a thing. Because they are, and we will talk about them. But let's move on to 5th edition book. Ooh. We're reaching onto the book I will suggest people check out. If you're going to run some Shadowrun. This is the one I definitely suggest checking out. I got to adjust it. I always hope that when I open these up, I don't have to adjust them. But then you do. You know, it's the usual. You can't quite get it perfect, and then you have to adjust it. So, 5th edition is the one I suggest if you want to check out an edition of Shadowrun. But we're going to talk about the 2060s now. We've gone through... I've skimmed over so much history that is out there from so many sources. I really am trying to keep this as distinct and important as, you know, possible. So, the big thing about 2061 is it is the year of the comet. Why? Because the United Nations declared it that, and Halley's Comet was coming into view. And I will tell you, some crazy stuff happened during the 2061-2062 when it came by to cause some effects to talk about. Yeah. So, as much as Haley's Comet... Oh, cool, the Comet's back. Yeah. Surge, Colts, Natural Orichalcum, and a lot of other strange occurrences kind of occurred. Yeah, some magical storms kind of happened. The Ring of Fire erupted. So Japan had a lot of volcanic eruptions and tidal waves. Philippines had problems. A lot of areas problems on the Pacific Rim. Imperial Japan had a shakeup in its way. The Imperial family had been killed except for one young man by the eruptions. And the kind of issue, which we'll talk about in a second. So Japan, the Diet withdrew all their troops to help rebuild the area. So one refused. The one that was in Central Valley in San Francisco. Yeah. So that area would be liberated. San Francisco. After Japanese, basically, occupation for such a long. The Filipinos got their self-independence from Japan in 2062. The dragon Ghostwalker appeared. Another great dragon. There's also a weird magical rift where Dunkle died, but that's a problem for a different day. So yeah. Yeah. Ghostwalker looks a lot like Dunkle. People likes to say it's his return, or like part of his will or something, but who knows? But yeah, Haley's Comet and this entire thing, there's just a lot of shit happens during this time period. Let's kind of break it down a little bit more if there's any more details that... Oh yeah, the Dunkle rift, the weird rift where he died. Yeah, that just... that's the thing there. Oh, and Surge is Sonic Unexplained Recessive Gene Expression. So Surge is the second wave of UEG and Goblinization. And it came about with Haley's Comet. Certain metahumans throughout the world, skin changes, fur, scale, color, sensory changes, cycloptic, single eyes, third eyes, decreased senses of taste, smell, and touch, tails, horns, dental armor, and other features. Magically produced individuals called changelings. Yeah. So a lot of new stuff happened. More magical creatures. That was the surge that came along with Haley's Comet. There's an airborne strain of Vetus 1 that pops up during this time period. Doesn't kill nearly as many people. We've honestly learned to deal with it mostly. Turns out, when a lot of people die for things and you study it for a while, you know, you learn to figure it out. So, the Comet has some troubles. Yeah. So, let's mention the survivor of the Imperial family, Yasuhito. The current emperor of Imperial Japan. He was exiled because of, you know, so the thing is, he is an Oni. It's a meta variant of orcs. And... Or was he... Why was he exiled? No, he's got half-brothers and sisters that were born there. I have to remember what... was going on with this. He was made emperor at age 14. Yeah. He's allowed foreign. He's caused some like political unrest in his decisions in Imperial state. So you know, he has God. Oh, his parents. He's got half siblings that were Oni, and that were exiled to Yomi Isle, and that's why he was never considered being able to give that. So he was saved from the eruption. So yeah, we've got someone that is basically in a very anti-metahuman country of Japan that's now got metahuman siblings and therefore kind of likes metahumans in a way, or is like much more on their side. So it's definitely a change in the way Japan operates. And Japan is actually opening up a little bit, you know. His current wife is a big member of the family that controls the Shiwase Corporation, someone who had the name Shiwase. She's a major shareholder in the corporation. Yeah. So, yeah, effectively, you know, interesting enough to say that she has 11% of the corporation of 2075. So yeah, it's interesting to see that Japan is changing for the good. And it's good. So that's an important thing to note with all of this entire thing. That's our time with the comet and the changes it has is one of the major things that happens in the 2060s. Oh, wait. We're not done with the 2060s. You thought the comet and like volcanic eruptions, a new dragon on the block, you know, more people, metatypes dividing even more. You know, so now there's subtypes of like metatypes. Now there's like cyclopses and all kinds of things and all stuff like that. Hey, the Matrix is going to crash in 2064. Yes, you heard me right. Good old Matrix Crash 2.0. We had the big old crash back in the crash virus of 2029 on October 2nd, 2064. The origin of this crash are known, and the destruction wrought by the Matrix class was a planned event by a series of factions, most notably the Ex-Pashas and Winter Knight. So the thing is, unlike the crash virus, where we don't know where it came from, we know who caused this crash here. We know who was behind this. Effectively. So, yeah. There were a couple signs of some stuff happening up till then. But, the perfect storm of events came together, and there was this second crash. Kind of glitchy, kind of destructive. Even the Shadow Matrix, basically like the underside, was not immune to the kind of... but not a lot of damage happened to like the shadowy side of the Matrix. A lot of nodes, though, were destroyed, basically. So, every part of the globe had it. The greatest damage, the wired matrix was left as smoking ruins in many portions of the world. So this did pave the way to what became after this a wireless matrix. You know, think about now. We have a kind of mixture of wired and wireless internet, but there is always this kind of wired aspect to the internet as we know it that retained for the original Matrix, though it was much more powerful. Because the original Matrix was much more like a VR existence, or like a much more complex system than what we had for our internet. This is the first time that basically everything became the wireless, the new Matrix 2.0. There were systems that relied on the Matrix failed. Deaths from derailed trains, plane crashes, power stations shut down. A lot of destruction. Cross-applied technologies was devastated. Lucian Cross was killed in a hostile takeovers by Ares. Wuxing and Yumatsu absorbed many failed companies. That kind of happened during this time period. The Ute Nation was absorbed by the Pablo Corporate Council because they were already failing, had problems economically, and this just caused them to crash. Seder Krupp had a secret Matrix kill switch that allowed their to keep them off the grid, so they were kind of pretty untapped. Wuxing faced a few setbacks, and Novatech had gotten a lot of money recently, so they were able to stabilize. But the idea is that from the East Coast Stock Exchange, they used it and just crashed systems across the world. So it was another big major crash. And yeah, the result is pretty bad. A group near the New Revolution uses the example to try to have a coup across the UCAS. They fail. There's more just crazy. Arabia goes into like for a while complete chaos. And yeah, things begin to settle down. Cross-applied technologies it loses its AAA status. It's reclassified as an A. It's revoked the corporate court. It kind of crashed. The corporate council restructures itself because AAA companies, basically the biggest of the big, are on the council. Comlinks, palm-sized cyber terminals, are released. Basically, super cell phones. Think about, like, our cell phones are pretty powerful, right? Think about, like, high-end PC, cell phone, and VR machine all in your hand. That's when we're getting to that level of kind of top. That's Comlink. Or Halcom. Natural veins of that appear in the world after the comet passes. And that's able to help new technologies with this entire thing, too. And the new Matrix systems kind of come into existence. And things, once again, sort of stabilize as we get into 2070s and into the 2080s. Oh, boy. Yep. Oh, boy. So there was a lot of rebuilding post-second crash. Certainly messed up a lot of stuff. But let's bring out our old friend 6th edition book, as we'll put that one up here for you to all see when we talk about this one here. That's a good enough picture of it. Let's just readjust that. So, now we have our good old friend 2070s. So, 2070 is technically the start of Shadowrun 4th edition. That's the start of it. And you may say, but wait a second, why are we talking about this from the back end of things? Well, because, honestly, the entire idea has been that the years take place approximately 62 years, I said. So, 5th edition takes place in 2075. 6th edition, when it came out, 2080. I'm also going to tell you, that's why I'm not, the editions are pretty close apart. 5th edition does some good updates, but 5th edition is not that far apart from it. Yeah, so, yeah. Yes, 4th edition came out, 20th anniversary. 5th edition is 2075. So 4th edition. Technically, 4th edition is looked upon as to like 2068 or something like that. 2067 in that area. So this is the 70s, so it's technically a little different between it because there was 8 years between the editions, and then it was another 6 years before 6th edition. And a lot longer between... Oh, 3rd edition was about the same. Editions of this game come out every, 7 years, honestly. So, we're not far off from the end of all of these things now. And, I can talk about where the corporate court currently is. Pablo Corporate Council offers sins to AIs. We have AIs becoming actual beings, recognized as beings, a number of them. Technomancers come about. The second crash brought about a number of people that can organically connect with the Matrix. They don't need machines for it. So Technomancers now, which seems to be a different derision of things kind of coming into being. So you can see that with this new wireless world, the world is changing a little bit now. We have new beings and new creatures that have come into being in the last 10 years. Sira, is very violent. They try to kill him off during this time period. They don't. Ghostwalker performs a ritual to close the rift in Washington, D.C. finally. 600 people are killed, 2,000 are injured, and nearly 350 are missing, believed pulled into the rift. But Ghostwalker closed that rift. The Draco Foundation continues to have power. The Great Dragon Hetsby speaks in front of the United Nations in July 23rd of 2073. She condemns Sirug's rampage. And urges a UN war crime tribunal to take action. So, it's sort of like the dragons are taking both sides, and each dragon is kind of in the... And anyway, short after Hetsby's speech to the UN, yeah, there's some problems with great dragons, and this occurs. We'll briefly talk about it. The Great Dragon Civil War, if you can call it that, which that's 27-4, and a lot of stuff happens. So basically, a bunch of great dragons kind of go to battle against each other in a, battle. And Lawfar sides with people because he's money. A lot of times. The Great Dragon Assembly results from this entire thing, though. So, at the end of the Great Dragon Civil War, effectively, on the 2074-2075, Avery Dragon convened together. All Great Dragons disappeared from their levels and their normal place of business. Smerg was sentenced to imprisonment. Heste was put on trial. And the remains of dragons killed during the war entombed in respect. Only Great Dragons know where they are. So yeah. And the biggest thing that they did is they declared that violence against metahumans by dragons was deceased. So, I mean, dragons got together and they kind of have a council that if something bad goes wrong, they work on dice. And Smirg was inducted for war crimes. So, I mean, like, you gotta hate that guy, that dragon. Kind of a jerk. Caused a lot of issues. Yeah. So, yeah. And there are more things that happen during the, I mean, honestly, big old dragon war and council meeting is a pretty big thing that happens during this time here. There, of course, Ghostwalker deals with Harlequin. I will tell you that is a thing that happens, and it's, Harlequin is another character maybe to talk about someday. Definitely. Definitely thing to start about. Then we hit 2075. 5th edition starts after only 5 years of difference. That's when the Great Dragon Assembly herds. And Hetsby is seen at Mount Hastash for the last time. Effectively, put away. Lorem is the lore master of the council, steps down. And Cedril is put in charge of it. Heads the Neonet R&D. Great Dragon. And basically, doesn't want Great Dragons to fuck around with metahumanity. Yeah. So, we kind of get down to the crux of things when we're hitting the 2080s and such. And the end of the 2070s. So, there isn't a lot left. I mean, one of the things is the CEO of Evo/Yamatsu, who was a Russian man who was the first human to put on Mars, was assassinated in 2077. But a lot of people get assassinated, honestly, in this world nowadays. Someone's going to do wet work. But in February of 2079, Ghostwalker basically took over Denver and kicked out all the people from the other thing. Announced that governments and all citizens from the CAS, PCC, Seuss Nation, and UCAS have 1 month to leave Denver. Yeah. And anyone after that would be basically have to swear fealty to him. Yeah. So that happened. Got taken over. Sorry, Denver. Yeah. Yeah. And then there's some queries of, like, weird astral rifts and stuff happening. And stuff happened in Denver. We'll just say stuff happened in Denver if you want to look into the bad things. And we hit our last years, the 2080s. Yay! Man, which, that's technically the start of 6th edition, 2080. It's like, there's stuff that happens in Detroit. Detroit is a mess. You know, Denver is a mess. Detroit isn't overrun with insect spirits, though there is a chance of that happening. You know, but otherwise than that, you know, things quiet down-ish. Or will they? Technically 5 years have gone by, but we don't really have dates about what's happened for those. Don't have a lot of information about that. And, you know, we can talk about the corp members of the members of the corporate court, because that's probably an interesting thing to mention, because that's going to be another talk about these megacorps runtime. It was originally founded by Ares Industries, Oro, BMW, JRJ International, Kreba International, Mitsuhama Computer Technology, and Shiwase Corporation. And corporations represented on the court as of 20 Ares is Ares Macro Technology. As Technology, who used to be Oro. Of course, Ares Industries used to be, is now Ares Macro. Horizon. Mitsuhama Computer Technologies, still there. Splin Global, who is leasing JRJ International seat. Renraku Computer Systems, bought out by Caribou. Seder Krupp, owning BMW. Shiwase Corporation's there. Wuxing and Evo, who used to be Yamametsu. Fuchi Industrial Electronics used to be there. Cross Applied Electronics used to be there. And Neonet, honestly, used to be there. But Neonet, after 2079, lost a lot of its power. 2070 for Cross Applied and 2060 for Fuchi. And I will tell you, those are names that are important to know, the big groups that control the world. If you hear about Renraku, if you hear about Seder Krupp, if you hear about As Technology, Ares Macro Technology, Shiwase, which is the exact same one who caused issues back at the beginning of all of this. Remember when we were talking that we were like, oh, hey, this corporation caused some goddamn issues. One of the two groups to do it. Guess what? They're still on the corporate court. Guess what? I remember what I said. The Empress of Japan is a major shareholder whose family controls it. Yeah, they're still there. Still causing issues. And of course, Seder Krupp is there with the dragon in charge. But yeah. So, it's good to know your megacorps and their history a little bit too. But I think that's enough, because we've gone over the basic histories, and it took me nearly 3 hours to go through this. I knew it would be long, because I was trying my best to get all the details that were important, but you had to sort through. There's a lot of details that are interesting, but are they going to be useful to your games? That's a question. So, my blurb here is probably the best that I can say we'll give you. Let's just, for an ending's sake here, throw out high-res Shadowrun world map, if I can find it here. Yes, I can. So, let's just throw this up here. Cool. It's only a small portion of it. Let's expand this out this way. Boom. Boom. And I'll try to get this the entire size of this entire thing. We'll try to, like, get it big. And I'll try to zoom through it a little bit here to show off all of this here. So, it's going to be over top of me for a second there. I'll move me over here for this last bit here. This is the global map of Shadowrun, circa 2060. I'm going to tell you, hasn't been a lot of changes globally. We can see, you know, North America, the UCAS, the Confederate States, the Caribbean League, Atlantia, Amazonia, Argentina still there, Bolivia, Chile, Peru, Ecuador still there. Aslan controls all of the Mexico and Central America. Of course, Africa is the Pan-African Federation. Most of that's taken up there. Egypt's its own thing. Ethiopia, Somalia, Madagascar. Down here for Aslan. A lot of European nations still mostly there. That's the thing, is Europe has kept its sovereignty. The Persian Empire, Iran, Pakistan, India, Australia, of course, is aligned over there with New Zealand, Malaysia. The Southeast Asia war zone is a thing. Sorry, Southeast Asia. China's broken apart, as you can see. Kazakhstan is still big. Russia's still a thing. Yakut awakens Siberia. There have been a few changes here, but this is the big global map 2060. Good idea to get an idea of all the nations of the world as they exist in it. It's a pretty complex world. So, anyway, I think that's good enough for today. So, I'm going to get going, and I hope everybody learned a few things, and you have an idea about the complexity of this world. And as I said, it's not an apocalyptic world. It's a dystopian world. There's been massive amount of massive destructions. We've had plagues that have devastated the population. We've had awakenings of magic, the splitting of humanity into a number of metatypes, that there are now a good number of metatypes, and then even those are more wildly divided. Horrible, bits of course, racism and violence and anger and hatred spread throughout the world that have existed under the guise of these economic problems and, megacorps that have been just influencing the world as they need. And it's a mess of a setting, but it's kinda neat. Because you're Shadowrunners, you're the people that do the dirty jobs outside of the government, outside of the law, hired on by people that are maybe member of the government, member of a megacorp, a smaller corp. It could be a AA or even a single A corporation that's hiring you. Someone out there has a job to do that they don't want to get involved with, and you are a job as a Shadowrunner to do it. And Seattle's a big place to do it. So maybe we'll do a primer on Seattle too at one point in time. Because Seattle's the core city that most of these talk about. But I could talk about a lot of these nations. So if anybody wanted to know more about these places in the world, and I will talk maybe a little bit more about the world of Shadowrun as it is leading into the 2070s, 2080s, to get an idea about them a little bit more. So maybe we'll have to do that at some point in time. But for now, I think we will leave it. So I'm going to head off. I hope everybody learned something. Thank you all for joining me, and I hope to see you next week for more of these things, and of course later on for other stuff on the channel here. Make sure to check out everything. And I hope this sparked your interest a little bit more in Shadowrun. Honestly, I hope it's just the idea of what's out there in this crazy world history has just sparked your interest a little bit more into looking into it. Because honestly, it is a complex system, but it is a fun system, and it is a easily learnable system. So it's not outside the realm of people to learn it. The extra nuances take a little while, but honestly, I would not say anything as like, if you can learn any system, you can learn this one. It's not going to be as easy as a 5e, but certainly not the most difficult. At least not modern ones with like 5th edition. So, alright. Farewell, everybody. Good luck. And till the next time.